Muldrotha the Gravetide has stood the test of time, remaining one of the more popular commanders since it was printed about 5 years ago. And it makes sense. Good color identity, lots of card advantage, plays well with the graveyard. Gyruda, Doom of the Depths, is more explosive, able to cheat you out giant creatures or steal some key creatures from your opponents. Mix together these two powerful cards and baby, you got a stew going. Welcome to Element Hobbies, where we take a look at the hobby side of Magic the Gathering, collections, accessories, and expression through deck building. I'm Alan, and in this video I'm going to share with you an explosive and enduring Muldrotha EDH deck with Gyruda as companion. For those unfamiliar, Muldrotha the Gravetide is a 6 mana value commander for 6/6. During your turn, you may play up to one permanent card of each permanent type from your graveyard. What that means is you can play a creature, an enchantment, an artifact, a planeswalker, a land, and or one of those new battle cards from March of the Machine in the same turn. And Muldrotha is great, don't get me wrong. There are any number of styles of decks you could run with Muldrotha at the helm, but this deck is mostly built around the companion, Gyruda. You can pay 3 mana at sorcery speed to put Gyruda into your hand. It doesn't say that on the card, so you'll just have to trust me. The printed companion rule was completely broken and had to be errated. Once in your hand, Gyruda is a 6 mana value for 6/6. When you play it, every player mills 4 cards. Then put one creature with an even mana value cost from the milled cards onto the battlefield. Having Gyruda as the companion will adjust your deck building and play in a few specific ways. Firstly, to even use Gyruda, your entire deck will need to consist of even mana value cards. Remember, 0 is an even number, so feel free to run all the spellbooks you want. Secondly, because of Gyruda's companion requirement, you won't necessarily have plays on turns 1 or 3, and might have unused mana on other odd turns, which means there is a slight premium on cards that have low mana value odd activation costs. For example, Boon of the Wishgiver can be run as a draw spell, or it can be cycled for 1. That bit of extra versatility is really handy on the odd turns where you can't cast anything, or might have extra mana available. Next, since you generally won't have a first turn play, you can run a bit of slow mana. I generally try to avoid lands that come into play tapped unless the upside is super substantial. In this deck, a turn 1 tap land is not necessarily a bad move. And lastly, since you can only get creatures from Gyruda's effect, you'll want as many creatures as you can stomach. This includes creatures that mimic effects you would generally find on instants or sorceries, like Foundation Breaker and Naturalize. You'll want a good percentage of non-creature permanents to make sure you still get value from Muldrotha, but strictly speaking from a Gyruda perspective, the more creatures the better. Now that we've got a good overview on how the deck needs to be constructed, we can get to the cards. We're going to start with ramp because it will address a point I need to emphasize with this deck. I like to diversify my ramp whenever I can. That means a somewhat even distribution of spell ramp, artifact ramp, and creature ramp. This is meant to lessen the blow if a specific board wipe is cast. If you go all in on creature ramp, Wrath of God hurts really bad. Go all in on artifacts, and Vandal Blast ruins your day. Having a good balance of ramp provides a bit more resilience, which I like. However, this is a Gyruda-focused deck, which means we want to have a lot of creatures. In my last video, I began using this symbol in conjunction with cards along the left side of the screen to denote which cards can be swapped out for variety's sake or budget concerns. I'll still do a bit of that here in this video, but I also want to use this slightly different colored symbol to signify that the cards on the left are just creature versions of the cards on the screen, just in case you want to go all in on creatures. There are tons of 2-drop mana acceleration creatures in green. Among mine are Paradise Druid, Sakura Tribe Elder, Elysian Caryatid, and Root Coil Creeper. Sakura Tribe Elder is good here because you can get it off a Gyruda trigger, then get a land out of your deck, increasing the concentration of creatures you have left in your deck. Elysian Caryatid powers up if you have Muldrotha or Gyruda in play. Root Coil Creeper is a fine 2 mana ramp as a creature, but it will provide double that mana when casting from your graveyard with Muldrotha. Rounding out the creature ramp is Tangled Florahedron, Incubation Druid, and Primeval Herald. Tangled Florahedron is nice because you can play it as a green land on your first turn, getting the precious green mana that you need so badly to play out the rest of your ramp spells. Incubation Druid can be activated for 5, and sometimes on turn 5 you just don't have anything else going. You can also get a cheeky counter on it from Teferi's Time Twister or Planar Incision, which we'll talk about later. Primeval Herald is just a really good card. You can get the ramp from the Gyruda flip, and then get another ramp when you attack with it next turn. For Artifact ramp, I start with Arcane Signet. This gets 1 out of 2 groans from me since Gyruda's companion requirement means that I cannot legally run Soul Ring, no matter how badly the rules committee wants me to. If you want to break my heart, you can take out any of the ramp from this section and replace it with a mana crypt. I then run the trifecta of signets for this color identity: Golgari Signet, Dimir Signet, and Simic Signet. Rounding out the ramp is Nature's Lore, Farseek, 3 Visits, and Skyshroud Claim. Nothing surprising here, just good ramp that can get dual lands and triomes. I mentioned Teferi's Time Twister and Planar Incision earlier, and that goes in the small blink package that I use alongside Thassa Deep Dwelling. Planar Incision and Teferi's Time Twist are used to either re-trigger an enter the battlefield effect, or save a creature from removal. Thassa is a nice Gyruda hit, allowing you to get another trigger at the end of the turn, and then every turn after that. Gyruda in clones as a strategy has been around since the 70s, and going critical mass on cloning Gyruda until everyone is milled out bores the crap out of me. However, cloning is still very strong in this deck and in EDH in general, so we run a few. Starting with Sakashima the Imposter, Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, Spark Double, and Mirror Hall Mimic. The Sakashima and the Spark Double can all clone Gyruda and stay in play, ignoring the legendary rule that prevents Gyruda clones from taking over CEDH. Mirror Hall Mimic will get graveyarded right away due to the legend rule, but then you can disturb it onto Gyruda for free Gyruda triggers on each of your upkeeps. Clever Impersonator and Phyrexian Metamorph round out the creature clones and are just solid clones in general. Feel free to replace either of these as you see fit. Dance of Many and Machine God's Effigy both provide alternative card types to use with Muldrotha, so in the same turn you could Clever Impersonator, Dance of Many, and Machine God's Effigy all from the graveyard. Drown in the Loch and Urtai Resurrected are the deck's only 2 counter magics, which do double duty as creature removal. Hostage Taker is a removal and a steal card. Binding of the Old Gods is an all-purpose removal with a delayed land ramp effect. I guess the Death Touch thing is okay too. Force of Vigor and Foundation Breaker are artifact and enchantment specific removal. Kogla can also hit those, but can fight as well. Terastodon is a big strong boy that can take out a pillow fort all by itself. With Gyruda, you're still going to be putting stuff in the graveyard, and with Muldrotha, you'll want to be casting stuff from your graveyard. So I run a few cards that work favorably with everyone's second favorite out of the play zone, the graveyard. Mesmeric Orb will start filling up your graveyard for Muldrotha, as well as put on a certain kind of pressure on your opponents so that they have to do something and they can't just durdle around. Animate Dead is great for when you reveal more than one Gyruda hit in the same trigger. Oversold Cemetery usually equals out to drawing an extra card a turn, but the real reason I run it is because I have the foil full art Drew Tucker version. If you have a card you would rather run in this spot, this is one of the cards you can easily replace. Geth Lord of the Vault is nice. You can grab any creatures your opponents flip with Gyruda that you don't want immediately. Just grab it later with Geth. Wonder is great to not pick in a Gyruda trigger, and instantly makes all your creatures airborne. Dread Return is a basic reanimator spell from your hand, but when milled directly into the graveyard can often be forgotten about by the table and can lead to a surprise win. Fact or Fiction, Hostile Negotiations, and Atris Oracle of Half-Truth are all variants of what I like to call flop and pick. That's all Gyruda is, and basically the reason I made the deck. Baleful Strix is a nice 2-drop to get out early in the game. It provides some defense and smooths out any potential mana issues. Titan's Nest is really great, and most people don't realize their butt is about to get blown out by this card. A Surveil each upkeep is good, but having Gyruda creating extra mana per trigger can lead to turns where you cast multiple 6+ mana value cards. Arcanist the Omnipotent can get out of hand if left unchecked, but in general it's just okay. It's definitely on the bubble of being replaced. I only run 2 board wipes because I'm stupid, and I don't care that I can just Muldrotha back anything I've already destroyed. I only run Massacre Worm and Extinction Event. Here's a tip: choose Odd with Extinction Event, unless you want to break my heart again because I already know you put Mana Crypt in your version of this deck. If you're going to be that cruel, at least leave a like on this video. First up is the biggest natural boy in Ghalta Primal Hunger. 12/12 Trample, and it can be normally cast for just GG after a Gyruda flip or 2. Craterhoof Behemoth and Indra's Forerunners make all your beefy boys even beefier. Centaur Vinecrasher has the potential to be the biggest, meatiest boy. I did an entire short dedicated to how underappreciated it is in this archetype. Self-recurring, scales to the amount of lands in all graveyards, perfect with Gyruda. Archon of Cruelty will net a sacrificed creature, discard, and loss of life for your opponent, and a card draw and 3 life each time it ETBs or attacks. Just great value on a great body. Burning Rune Demon is a mini Gifts Ungiven on a body. And like Gifts Ungiven, you'll want to search up redundancy, getting 2 clones, 2 card draw, 2 lands, or something like 1 creature and 1 reanimation. Remember, getting permanents means that you'll be able to get the card that gets binned with Muldrotha later on. Prime Speaker Zagana will get power and draw you cards equal to the highest power creature you already have, +1. With a Gyruda out, that's a minimum of 7 card draw and 7 power. Sphinx of the Second Sun gives you an additional beginning phase at the beginning of the post-combat main phase, also referred to as the second main phase. Now what the beginning phase is the untap, upkeep, and draw steps. If you clone the Sphinx, you'll get 2 extra beginning phases. This means you'll want to do your Gyruda flips in the first main phase, just in case you flip into a Sphinx, or even something like a Craterhoof Behemoth or Indra's Forerunners. Rexiol the Risen Deep is a nice way to get some effects you don't really have access to in this deck, via stealing them from your opponent's graveyard. Zenithar Guild Kingpin fits in a similar spot as Rexiol, but doesn't require the red zone. Rakshasa Debaser and Scion of Darkness both let you get cards from your opponents that you've Gyrudaed into their graveyards. Scion of Darkness can also cycle for 3, which is something you can do on turn 3, which you don't always have, so that's a bonus. Kodama of the East Tree won't do much if it enters via a Gyruda trigger, but each subsequent trigger you'll get to put stuff into play from your hand. Remember, it just has to be a permanent, so on a trigger you can put into play an enchantment, artifact, or even just a land for the slowest land ramp possible. Gyruda Golgari Lichlord covers a lot of grounds, gets extra meat for each creature in your graveyard, can sacrifice the other beefy boys to close out a game, and bring itself back without Muldrotha. Vilas Broker of Blood is the de facto Grizzlebrand wannabe. It's a little different because you can get a lot of incidental card draw from stuff like Shocklands and Fetchlands. Cityscape Leveler is the most recent addition to the deck. It doesn't trigger on the ETB from Gyruda, but if you can keep it alive and attack, destroying any non-land permanent is a pretty nice repeatable ability. The Unearth on it is also relevant. I run 5 lands that I can generally get blue, black, and green from. Command Tower is Command Tower, and since you're playing the best 3 colors in EDH, odds are Exotic Orchard will give you what you need. Path of Ancestry, Opulent Palace, and Zagoth Triome all come into play tapped, but that's not so bad in this deck. Remember, you really don't have any turn 1 plays, so you can use that turn for high upside tap lands. I then run the Simic, the Dimir, and the Golgari versions of the 6 best dual lands that I have. The OG dual lands, fetch lands, shock lands, battle lands, slow lands, and then pain lands. I really only have 1 utility land, and it's Mosswort Bridge. In this deck it's super easy to get to 10 total power, so this is almost just a free draw and a free spell. Then I run 4 forests, 4 islands, and 3 swamps. For this deck I choose the Wanderer Showcase lands from Innistrad Midnight Hunt. I like this particular series because the centers of all the arts have this backlight coming through near in the center, and it gives a different weight to how the card looks than other showcase lands. Early game you want to hit your lands, ramp a little bit, and get Gyruda into your hand. Casting Gyruda on turn 4 or 5 is a huge advantage. Mid-game you're going to want to be getting as many triggers from Gyruda as possible, cloning it, blinking it, whatever. Use the advantage game from the abilities of your creatures to provide overwhelming advantage. The end game has a couple different scenarios. Opponents may have stymied your Gyruda attempts, so you'll want to get Muldrotha going and try to outlast everyone with your perpetual value machine and fat creatures. Another possibility is just having a ton of monsters and using Indra's Forerunners or Craterhoofs to squash everyone out. You may also be in one of those stalemate type games, in which case you can use Muldrotha to aggressively clone and or blink Gyruda and mill everyone out. Other than that, just have fun. You're cheating big fat creatures into play, which is technically Magic the way Richard Garfield intended. If you enjoyed this style of video, you may want to subscribe to the channel. I do EDH deck videos, product reviews, and some new wacky stuff that I'm cooking up. Was this deck not up your alley? Try a slower controlling Azorius deck with this Afara EDH deck tech here, or this small aggressive creature strategy Gix EDH deck tech here. Thank you for watching Element Hobbies, and I'll see you in the next video.